What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Hello, brave souls. Today I've got part 3 for you for the Silent Plague. So here we go. Part 3. Resistance. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he slipped through the pantry door and into the narrow passage that led to the basement. Behind him, he could hear multiple sets of footsteps entering the house. The measured tread of people who move with authority and purpose. "Mr. Maxwell, we know you're here. We just want to talk." The voice was female, calm and professional, not threatening, but insistent. Thomas wasn't taking any chances. He quietly closed the hidden door behind him and descended the stairs to the reinforced basement. Once inside, he locked the steel door and took a moment to catch his breath. His grandfather's warning echoed in his mind. The Operation Silence protocols are still in effect. These people, whoever they are, hadn't come for a friendly chat about inheritance taxes. Thomas moved quickly through the basement archive, grabbing a backpack he found hanging beside one of the uniform mannequins. He stuffed the journals inside, along with a sealed envelope from the wall safe that contained his grandfather's list of contacts. When he turned his attention to the weapons, most were clearly outdated. Modified firearms from the 1950s with strange attachments that Thomas couldn't identify. But on a separate rack labeled Current were more modern weapons, including a compact handgun with an unusual ultraviolet sight and several magazines of ammunition marked with a biohazard symbol. Thomas had never fired a gun in his life. The weight of it felt wrong in his hands, alien. But he took it anyway, along with a combat knife and a leather sheath. Whatever was happening, his grandfather had believed it was worth killing and dying for. Above him, he could hear the methodical sounds of the house being searched room by room. They were being careful, thorough. They knew what they were looking for. At the far end of the basement was another door, this one marked with a faded yellow radiation symbol. Thomas hadn't noticed it during his initial exploration. It had no obvious handle or lock, just a small metal plate at about shoulder height. On a hunch, Thomas pressed his palm against the plate. A soft hum emanated from within the door, followed by a click. His grandfather's final letter had mentioned biometric security measures keyed to Maxwell DNA. The door swung inward to reveal a narrow tunnel, dimly lit by emergency lighting along the floor. Thomas didn't hesitate. He entered the tunnel, closing the door behind him, just as he heard a loud bang from the main entrance. They were trying to break through. The tunnel sloped gently downward, curving away from the house. After about 50 yards, it opened into a small underground garage containing a dust-covered vehicle. It wasn't what Thomas expected. Not a military transport armored car, but a nondescript dark blue SUV that looked to be about 10 years old. Practical, anonymous. Inside the vehicle, Thomas found a sealed plastic container holding cash, several sets of identification documents with his photo, but different names, and a prepaid cell phone. His grandfather had prepared an escape route and a new identity for him. How long had Edwin been expecting this day to come? A note was taped to the steering wheel. "If you're reading this, they found you. Drive north. The cabin is stocked and secured. Coordinates in the GPS. The key works for both the vehicle and the distribution center in Lakewood. You'll know what to look for. Don't try to fight them. Not yet. First, you need to understand what you're truly facing. E." The engine started on the first try, purring with a quiet efficiency that belied the vehicle's aged appearance. A GPS unit built into the dashboard came to life, a route already programmed. Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself. The tunnel continued ahead, presumably leading away from the property. There was no turning back now. He put the SUV in drive and followed the tunnel to its end, a concealed exit that opened on a rural service road nearly half a mile from his grandfather's house. As the hidden door closed behind him, Thomas caught a glimpse of multiple black SUVs surrounding the Victorian home in his rearview mirror. Who were they? Department of Defense, they claimed. But his grandfather's journal suggested the cover-up had involved multiple agencies operating under classified directives. Whoever they were, they'd come prepared to contain a security breach. Thomas merged on the highway heading north, his mind racing. The cabin his grandfather mentioned was most likely remote. Defensible. A place to regroup and process everything he'd learned. But the reference to a distribution center in Lakewood was puzzling. Distribution for what? For 3 days, Thomas drove, taking indirect routes and back roads, stopping only for fuel and to sleep for brief periods in the SUV at isolated rest areas. The prepaid phone remained silent. No way for anyone to track him through it unless he used it. The GPS finally led him to a narrow dirt road deep in the northern Michigan wilderness. 2 miles in, he came upon a small log cabin nestled against the side of a steep, wooded hill. No other structures were visible in any direction. Perfect isolation. The cabin itself was simple but well maintained. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom with running water powered by a generator housed in a shed outside. But it was a cellar that revealed his grandfather's true purpose for the place. A reinforced door with the same biometric lock as the escape tunnel led to an underground bunker that would have made any doomsday prepper envious. The walls were lined with supplies, non-perishable food, water, medical equipment, ammunition, and more of the specialized weapons he'd seen in the basement archive. One section was dedicated to communications equipment, ham radios, satellite phones, and an outdated but functional computer system. Another held research materials, copies of the documents Thomas had seen in the main archive, plus additional files his grandfather must have deemed too sensitive to keep in the house. A map of North America dominated one wall, marked with red pins concentrated in northern Canada, the region his grandfather had mentioned in his final letter. Next to it was a corkboard covered with newspaper clippings, most dated within the last year. Third hunting party vanishes in Yukon wilderness. Remote research station loses contact. Rescue delayed by storms. Unusual animal behavior reported by northern communities. Thomas sank into a chair at the command desk, overwhelmed. His grandfather hadn't been paranoid or delusional. He'd been monitoring what he believed was the beginning of another outbreak, and he'd prepared this place not just as a hideout, but as an operations center. The computer hummed to life when Thomas pressed the power button. A password prompt appeared on the screen. Thomas thought for a moment, then typed ZRF 1953. Access granted flashed across the screen, followed by a desktop containing dozens of encrypted files. Before Thomas could explore them, a video player opened automatically. His grandfather's face appeared on the screen, looking significantly older than in the photographs Thomas had seen in the journals, but still possessing that same stern intensity. "Thomas," the recorder began, "if you're watching this, then 2 things have happened. I've died, and you discovered the truth I spent my life trying to protect you from. I'm sorry for the secrecy, for the distance I kept all those years. It was the only way I knew to keep you safe." Edwin Maxwell's image shifted slightly, as if settling into the chair. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. In 1952, something emerged from the permafrost in northern Canada during a mining operation. The official report called it a pathogen of unknown origin, some kind of prehistoric bacteria or virus that had been dormant for millennia. What it really was, we never fully understood." Edwin's expression darkened. "This pathogen didn't just kill, Thomas. It transformed. Those infected would die within hours, only to reanimate with a single driving instinct, to spread the infection through bites and bodily fluids. We called them walkers, officially. But the truth is, they were the closest thing to actual zombies you could imagine, though they were faster, more aggressive than anything you'd seen in horror movies." Thomas leaned closer to the screen as his grandfather continued. "The initial outbreak spread rapidly across the northern territories before the government even recognized the threat. By the time the first zombie response force units were deployed, we were looking at potential continental extinction. We fought for 4 years, burned cities, sacrificed communities, did unspeakable things in the name of containment." Edwin paused, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes, a gesture of profound weariness. We finally developed an effective vaccine in 1956 and implemented Operation Silence. The systematic erasure of the entire event from public memory. History was rewritten. Records were destroyed. Survivors were sworn to secrecy under penalty of treason. The few of us who knew the full truth formed a network to maintain vigilance, to watch for signs of resurgence. For decades, there were none. The old man's face hardened with resolve. But something's happening now, Thomas. The patterns I've observed in the north match the early stages of the first outbreak too closely to be coincidental. The government monitored stations I've been hacking into show anomalous readings in the same region where it all began. They're keeping it quiet, but they know. Operation Silence has given way to something called Project Sentinel, a containment protocol that I haven't been able to fully infiltrate. Edwin leaned closer to the camera. You need to understand what we're dealing with. These creatures, they're not mindless shamblers. They retain basic problem-solving abilities. They can use simple tools, work in groups, and they adapt. Each generation of infection seems to produce subtle mutations. If a new outbreak has begun, there's no telling how the pathogen might have evolved after 7 years in dormancy. Edwin reached for something off-screen and held up a small metal object, a flash drive. This contains everything I've managed to compile. Research data, tactical information, weaknesses we discovered, and the formula for the vaccine. The distribution center in Lakewood houses the last remaining doses of the original vaccine, hidden in plain sight in a pharmaceutical storage facility. My old security credentials would still work. I made sure of that. Thomas glanced at the backpack where he'd stored his grandfather's documents. The key to the distribution center was inside. There's one more thing, Thomas. You're not alone in this. There are others. Children and grandchildren of the original ZRF members, who have been prepared as you have. Their names and locations are in the encrypted file marked Inheritance. Find them. Together, you might stand a chance if the worst happens. Edwin's expression softened slightly, the closest thing to warmth Thomas had ever seen from him. I wish I could have told you all this in person. I wish I could have trained you properly. But involving you directly would have put a target on your back. The agencies responsible for maintaining Operation Silence don't hesitate to eliminate security risks. His grandfather glanced down, and back up at the camera with fierce intensity. Trust your instincts, Thomas. You're a Maxwell. Fighting this fight is in your blood. And remember, the head or the spine. Nothing else stops them permanently. The video ended, leaving Thomas staring at his own reflection in the dark screen. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the pine trees surrounding the cabin. It would be dark soon. Thomas moved to the communications area and turned on one of the satellite radios. For several minutes, he scanned through frequencies, listening to mundane chatter, weather reports, truckers complaining about road conditions, amateur radio enthusiasts discussing equipment. Then he found it. An encrypted channel that the system automatically decoded with Edwin's security protocols. Containment breach at Research Station 9. Multiple personnel infected. Implementing purge protocol. Request immediate air support for perimeter reinforcements. Cannot guarantee. Static interrupted transmission, followed by a scream that made Thomas's blood run cold. Code Black! Code Black! They breached the... The transmission cut off completely. Thomas checked the map on the wall. Research Station 9 was the only location marked with a red pin, approximately 300 miles north, just across the Canadian border. With shaking hands, Thomas opened the encrypted file labeled Inheritance on the computer. It contained a list of 27 names with locations scattered across the United States. The closest was in Detroit, less than a day's drive away. Dr. Cassandra Wise, granddaughter of Dr. Wise, mentioned repeatedly in Edwin's journals. Thomas reached for the prepaid phone. It was time to make contact. His grandfather had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment, creating a network of inheritors who would understand what was coming. The silent plague is returning, and Thomas Maxwell, who had never considered himself a fighter, would have to become one, or watch history repeat itself in ways too horrific to imagine. As he dialed the number listed for Dr. Wise, Thomas realized the red journal contained one final message he hadn't noticed before, scrawled on the inside back cover in his grandfather's writing. Remember, Thomas. They remember how to open doors. They remember how to use fire. God help us all if they remember anything else while they slept. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 3 of the Silent Plague or the Lost Generation or whatever we're going to call this. And yeah, look forward to more parts. I've got plenty of more parts coming for the story. I really, really am enjoying this one. So I hope you guys are enjoying it too. And I'll see you next time. Always remember to face your fears. Come say hi. Say bye.
Bye.
Bye.